The sleek alien warship hung in the void, like a blade of polished obsidian, its hull reflecting the dying light of Earth's burning orbital platforms. The Arbiter, flagship of the 12-World Coalition's Fifth Armada, had arrived with all the ceremony of executioners come to claim their due. Below, the blue-green marble that was Earth spun on, seemingly oblivious to its impending doom. In the command center of the Arbiter, holographic displays flickered with incoming data streams. The numbers were almost laughable. Earth's kill count, 17 Coalition drones, 3 scout vessels, and approximately 42 ground troops who had made the mistake of landing too early. Negligible by any standard of interstellar warfare. Pathetic, Commander Valnara hissed through her crystalline teeth, her 6 eyes narrowing as she studied the tactical readouts. The Silthian's iridescent scales shifted from deep purple to angry crimson. This is the legendary Death World, the planet whose very name makes younglings tremble in their sleep pods? Her lieutenants exchanged glances, none daring to voice their own disappointment. They had come expecting a bloodbath worthy of the history texts, a final confrontation with the most violent species in known space. Instead, they found a world that seemed to be rolling over without so much as a whimper. Lieutenant Sorka, the sole human on the bridge, kept her eyes fixed on her translation console. Born on one of Earth's colony worlds and raised among the Coalition, she had spent years preparing for this moment, studying Earth's languages and customs. Part of her had hoped her birth world would prove the legends wrong, that humanity might show it had evolved beyond its violent past. But another part, a deeper part she rarely acknowledged, had expected more. Perhaps they're conserving their strength, Sorka suggested carefully, her accent still carrying traces of Earth despite decades among the stars. Humans have always been known for unconventional tactics. Valnara's laugh was like breaking glass. Conserving, they're dying. Interpreter, look at these numbers. The gambling halls across the 12 worlds are already calling this invasion a waste of resources. The Urgathi Consortium has halved their bets on Earth resistance lasting more than a solar week. In the corner of the bridge, barely noticed among the bustle of military personnel, a young human girl sat at a secondary data terminal. Mira Cheng, barely 16 Earth years old, had been assigned to the invasion fleet as a junior analyst. One of many humans from the colony worlds brought along to help with translation and cultural interpretation. She was unremarkable in every way that mattered to the Coalition brass. Small, quiet, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and clothes that seemed perpetually a size too large. But Mira was watching. More importantly, she was counting. Her fingers danced across the holographic interface with practiced ease, pulling data streams that others ignored. While the main tactical displays showed Coalition victories and Earth defeats, Mira's screen told a different story. She tracked evacuation routes, civilian movements, and something else. Something the Coalition's military algorithms weren't designed to recognize. Acts of mercy. The 12-World Coalition had risen to prominence through a simple philosophy. Might makes right. And the mightiest deserved to rule. For over 3 centuries, they had maintained order through a carefully orchestrated system of controlled conflicts. Worlds deemed too violent or unpredictable were offered a choice: submit to Coalition rule or face invasion. The invasions themselves had become something of a sport, broadcast across the 12 worlds, with kill counts and tactical brilliance rated like athletic performances. The Coalition consisted of 12 species, each bringing their own strengths to the Confederation. The Silthians, like Valnara, were master strategists with a military tradition spanning millennia. The Urgathi were merchants and gamblers who had turned war into profitable entertainment. The ethereal Kylian provided advanced technology, while the hulking Drex served as shock troops. Each species had earned their place through conquest, and each viewed violence as the primary measure of a civilization's worth. Earth had been marked for invasion for decades. The planet's history of warfare was legendary even by coalition standards. World wars, genocides, nuclear weapons. Humanity had invented ways of killing that made even the battle-hardened Drex pause. The decision to finally move against Earth had been driven partly by fear and partly by pride. If the coalition could break the most violent world in known space, their supremacy would be unquestioned for generations. But the Earth, they found, was not quite what they expected. "Commander," the tactical officer called out, his forearms working multiple consoles simultaneously. "We're detecting massive energy signatures from the surface. It appears the humans are destroying their own defense installations." Valnara's scales shifted to a puzzled yellow. "Clarify. They're initiating self-destruct sequences on all major military installations before our forces can reach them. We're being denied intelligence, technology, even basic infrastructure. They're giving us nothing to capture." "Scorched earth tactics," Sorka murmured, remembering her history lessons. "An old human strategy. Deny the enemy resources even at great cost to yourself." "Madness," Valnara spat. "What good is a strategy that provides no kills, no glory? The arena viewers will be switching channels within the hour." But Mira knew better. Her screen showed the real purpose behind the destruction. Each detonation was precisely timed, each evacuation route carefully planned. The humans weren't just denying resources to the coalition, they were creating time. Time for civilians to reach shelter, time for resistance cells to scatter and regroup, time for something else, something Mira was only beginning to understand. The first wave of coalition ground forces landed 3 days after the Arbiter's arrival. Drop pods fell like burning rain across Earth's major continents, disgorging thousands of Drex warriors and Silthian tactical units. They expected to find human armies massed for battle, defense lines drawn in desperate sand. Instead, they found empty cities and silent streets. Beijing, once home to over 20 million souls, echoed with the sound of coalition boots on abandoned pavement. New York's towering skyline stood like a monument to absence. London's ancient streets were swept clean of all but memories. "Where are they?" growled Thax, the Drex battalion leader assigned to secure the North American continent. His massive frame, nearly 3 meters of muscle and armor, seemed almost comical stalking through a deserted shopping mall. How does an entire population simply vanish? His subordinates had no answers. Thermal scans showed traces of recent human presence, but the heat signatures were scattered, diffuse, leading in all directions and none. It was as if the humans had simply melted away like morning mist. Then came the first real resistance. It started small. A supply convoy traveling through the ruins of Detroit simply failed to report in. When a recovery team was sent, they found the vehicles intact but empty. Their occupants vanished without signs of struggle. The only clue was a message spray-painted on the lead transport. "We are still here." Within hours, similar incidents were reported across the globe. Coalition patrols would enter buildings only to find their exits sealed. Communication arrays would fail at critical moments. Supply depots would be found contaminated with substances that, while harmless to humans, caused severe allergic reactions in Irgathi physiology. But most puzzling of all, the kill count remained staggeringly low on both sides. In the gambling halls of Zerion Prime, the Irgathi were growing restless. The massive amphitheaters, designed to showcase the greatest military conflicts in the galaxy, were half empty. The few viewers who remained watched with growing bewilderment as Earth's invasion played out like a strange dance rather than a war. "This is supposed to be the death world," a young Irgathi sneered, his credit chips clinking as he prepared to leave. "My clutch mother told me stories of humans that would freeze my ichor. These creatures can barely manage a proper ambush." On the main viewing screen, coalition forces swept through another empty city, their weapons trained on shadows that refused to materialize into targets. The kill count ticker at the bottom of the screen had barely moved in hours. Earth, 73. Coalition, 41. Perhaps. An older Irgathi mused, his merchant's mind always seeking angles others missed. We are measuring the wrong thing. But his voice was drowned out by the crowd's disappointment. Already, bets were being withdrawn, attention turning to a border skirmish between two minor worlds that promised more traditional bloodshed. The conquest of Earth, that legendary moment in Coalition history, was becoming a joke. Valnara felt the shame like a physical weight. Each report from the surface was another cut to her pride. Her forces controlled territory, but held nothing. They occupied cities but commanded no one. It was like trying to grasp water with clawed fingers. Commander, Sorka approached carefully, knowing the Scythian's temper had grown shorter with each passing day. I've been analyzing the human resistance patterns. I believe I've found something significant. Valnara's 6 eyes focused on the interpreter with barely concealed irritation. Unless you've found their armies, I'm not interested. Not armies, Sorka said, calling up a holographic map of Earth. But patterns. Look here. Every time our forces approach a location, human heat signatures disperse in what seems like chaos. But if you track them over time, the map shifted, showing movement patterns across days rather than hours. What had seemed like random scattering resolved into something else. A complex web of underground tunnels, hidden shelters, and supply routes that crisscrossed continents. They're not fleeing, Sorka continued. They're relocating. Civilians, resistance fighters, even their wounded, they're all moving through the same network. And Commander, they're taking some of our people with them. Valnara's scales rippled with confusion. Explain. 3 days ago, Private Kelix of the 3rd Drex went missing during a patrol in Cairo. Yesterday, we received a transmission, audio only. It was Kelix, reporting that he was alive, unharmed, and being treated for a minor infection he'd contracted. The humans had captured him, treated his illness, and were offering to return him in exchange for medical supplies for their own wounded. A prisoner exchange? Valnara's voice dripped with disdain. How pedestrian. Not an exchange, Sorka corrected. They asked for medical supplies, but they returned Kelix regardless of whether we agreed. They said he wasn't their enemy, just another being caught in a bad situation. The bridge fell silent. In 300 years of coalition warfare, no one had ever heard of such a thing. Prisoners were resources, to be ransomed, interrogated, or eliminated. The idea of returning an enemy combatant out of what? Compassion? It was incomprehensible. In her corner, Mira allowed herself a small smile. Her secondary screen now showed dozens of similar incidents, carefully tracked and catalogued. Coalition wounded tended by human medics. Lost patrol members guided back to their units by children. Food and water left in places where coalition forces would find them, marked with the same message. We are still here. She had started calling it the other count, the tally no one else was keeping. General Kaito Takahashi had not slept properly in 6 days. The command bunker, buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, hummed with the controlled chaos of a resistance in motion. Screens showed the positions of coalition forces, refugee movements, and the 1,000 other details that meant the difference between survival and extinction. General, his aide, Maria Santos, approached with another report. The Sydney cell successfully diverted the coalition patrol, no casualties on either side. Kaito nodded, adding another mark to his mental tally. It was a different kind of warfare than he had trained for, different from anything in humanity's blood-soaked history. When the coalition threat had first emerged, Earth's militaries had prepared for traditional warfare, tanks, missiles, grand battles that would echo through history. But something had changed in the final months before invasion. Perhaps it was the knowledge that they faced not just another human enemy, but an alien force that saw them as nothing more than violent animals to be put down. Perhaps it was the realization that proving the Coalition right would doom not just Earth, but every human colony among the stars. Or perhaps, Kaito thought, humanity had finally grown tired of adding to its body count. The strategy they had developed was unprecedented in human military history. They called it the Scatter Protocol, a complete decentralization of human resistance that turned every citizen into a potential fighter and every fighter into a potential savior. Instead of massed armies, they had cells. Instead of held territory, they had hidden networks. Instead of counting enemy dead, they counted lives saved. "Sir," another aide interrupted, "we have a situation in New Beijing. The Coalition is establishing some kind of arena?" Kaito studied the satellite imagery. The Coalition forces were constructing a massive holographic projection system around the city, turning it into a giant amphitheater visible from orbit. "They're getting desperate," Maria observed. "Their audience is losing interest." Kaito saw it too. The Coalition's entire military doctrine was built on spectacle, on the glory of conquest broadcast for the entertainment of their citizens. Earth's refusal to provide that spectacle was undermining more than just the invasion. It was challenging the fundamental assumptions of Coalition society. "How many of our people are still in New Beijing?" Kaito asked. "Nearly 1 million, sir, hidden in the tunnel networks. 1 million lives in the old days." Kaito knew a general might sacrifice them for strategic advantage, but these were not the old days. "Send word to all cells," he ordered. "We're going to give the Coalition their spectacle, but not the one they're expecting." Mira had been tracking the New Beijing situation for hours when the announcement came through. Valnara's image appeared on every screen in the fleet, her scales shifting through a rainbow of colors that Mira had learned indicated extreme emotion. "Citizens of the Coalition," the commander began, her voice carrying across space to the 12 worlds. "The humans continue their cowardly refusal to face us in honorable combat. Therefore, I issue this challenge. We will lay siege to the Earth city of New Beijing. The humans have 1 week to mount a defense. At the end of that time, we will enter the city and count the dead. Let us see if these so-called Death Worlders can manage even a respectable showing." The bridge erupted in activity as the Arbiter moved into position above New Beijing. Weapon systems came online, ground forces prepared for deployment, and the massive holographic projectors began turning the city into an arena visible to viewers across the galaxy. But Mira was watching something else. Her data streams showed movement in the tunnels beneath New Beijing. Not the panicked flight of refugees, but the purposeful motion of people with a plan. She enhanced the resolution, trying to understand what she was seeing. Then her breath caught. The humans weren't fleeing the city. They weren't even fortifying it. They were opening it. "Lieutenant Sorka," she called out, abandoning her usual quiet for the first time since boarding the Arbiter. "You need to see this." Sorka moved to Mira's station, her expression shifting from annoyance to confusion as she studied the data. "This can't be right. They're opening all the entrances, disabling what few defenses they had." "Not just opening," Mira said, her fingers flying across the interface. "Look at the infrastructure changes. They're converting defensive positions into medical stations, food distribution centers. They're inviting us in." Sorka breathed. "But why?" Mira pulled up another display, this one showing communication intercepts from the human resistance. Most were encrypted beyond even the Coalition's ability to decode, but some were being broadcast in the clear, messages of hope, coordination for humanitarian efforts, and something else. Stories. "They're going to show them," Mira said, understanding flooding through her. "Not the war the Coalition expects, but who humanity really is." The first day of the siege was everything Valnara had hoped for. Coalition forces surrounded New Beijing in a display of military might that would have made any reasonable species surrender immediately. Drek's warriors stood shoulder to shoulder, their plasma weapons creating a wall of potential death. Silthian tactical units hovered overhead in attack formation. The very air seemed to crackle with impending violence. The response from the city was music. It started soft, barely audible over the hum of coalition equipment. Then it grew, spreading from building to building until the entire city resonated with sound. Not martial anthems or battle hymns, but something else. A melody that seemed to speak of loss and hope in equal measure. "What is that?" Valnara demanded. "It appears to be a song, Commander," the communications officer reported. "Multiple languages, but the same melody. The humans call it Ode to Joy." As the music played, the gates of New Beijing swung open, but instead of warriors pouring out to meet their doom, there was a single figure, an elderly human woman, walking with the aid of a cane, carrying nothing but a white banner. The coalition forces tensed, weapons tracking the lone figure. Surely this was a trap, a prelude to attack. But the woman simply walked to a point halfway between the city and the coalition lines, planted her banner in the ground, and sat down. Then others began to emerge. Children carrying flowers, adults with baskets of food, elderly people supported by the young. They spread out from the city like a tide, not attacking, not fleeing, simply existing, being human in full view of the galaxy. "Open fire," Valnara ordered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Commander," the weapons officer hesitated. They're unarmed, all of them. Firing on them would what?" Valnara snarled. "Give us the kill count we came for." But even as she spoke, she knew the truth. The gambling halls would not celebrate the massacre of unarmed civilians. There was no glory in slaughtering those who refused to fight back. The humans had turned the very concept of warfare on its head. "Ma'am," another officer called out, "we're receiving reports from the ground. The humans they're offering food to our troops. Medical assistance. They say they have facilities prepared for any coalition members who need help." Valnara's scales cycled through colors so quickly they seemed to blur. This was not warfare as she understood it. This was not conquest or resistance. This was something entirely other. On the ground, the situation was even more surreal. Drek's warriors, bred for battle from birth, found themselves face to face with human children offering them flowers. When Private Thex accidentally crushed one of the delicate blooms in his massive hands, the child simply smiled and gave him another. "Why?" Thex asked in broken English, his translator struggling with the concept. "We come to kill. Why give flowers?" The child, no more than 7 years old, looked up at the towering alien warrior with eyes that held no fear. "Because you look sad," she said simply. "Flowers help when you're sad." Across the impromptu gathering, similar scenes played out. Coalition medics, prepared to treat combat wounds, instead found themselves working alongside human doctors to tend to the sick and injured of both species. Soldiers trained to see humans as violent monsters discovered instead artists eager to share their work. Musicians who played for anyone who would listen, and cooks who insisted that no one, human or alien, should face death on an empty stomach. Lieutenant Sorka moved through the crowd like a ghost, her trained mind trying to process what she was seeing. She had studied human history, knew the bloody trail that led to this moment. But she had also studied human literature, their philosophy, their dreams of what they could become. We are more than our worst moments. An old human man told her when she paused to help him distribute water to coalition troops. It took us a long time to learn that, but learn it we did. But your history, Sorka said, the wars, the violence, is part of us, the man agreed, but not all of us. and certainly not the part we choose to show the universe when it comes calling. In the command center of the Arbiter, Mira's fingers flew across her interface. She had abandoned all pretense of working on assigned tasks, instead dedicating every processing cycle to documenting what was happening below. Her other count had exploded, thousands of acts of kindness, of mercy, of simple human decency playing out under the eyes of the galaxy. She created a new data stream, broadcasting on an open channel that anyone could access. Not the official coalition military feeds, but something raw and unfiltered. The true count of what was happening on Earth. Within hours, her feed had more viewers than the official invasion broadcast. The images were unprecedented. Coalition soldiers sharing meals with human families. Drex warriors learning human games from laughing children. Silthian tacticians engaged in deep philosophical discussions with human scholars. And through it all, not a single shot fired, not a single life taken. In the gambling halls, confusion reigned. Bets on kill counts became meaningless when no one was dying. Some demanded their money back, claiming fraud. Others watched in fascinated silence as a new kind of victory unfolded, one measured not in bodies, but in bonds formed between species that were supposed to be enemies. "I don't understand," a young Quailan viewer transmitted to his hive mates. "Where is the conquest? Where is the glory?" "Perhaps," responded an elder, "we have been looking for glory in the wrong places." Valnara stood rigid on the bridge, watching her invasion crumble in real time. Not through military defeat, her forces could still annihilate the city whenever she chose, but through something far more insidious: doubt. Reports flooded in from the ground. Soldiers refusing orders to maintain aggressive postures. Entire units requesting permission to stand down. Some had even removed their helmets, exposing themselves to Earth's atmosphere and, more dangerously, to seeing humans as people rather than targets. "Commander," her second-in-command approached carefully. "The 12 World Council is demanding an update. They want to know why the kill count remains so low." "Tell them," Valnara began, then stopped. What could she tell them? That the humans had refused to play their assigned role? That her mighty invasion force was being undone by flowers and food rather than plasma and projectiles? "Commander," the officer prompted. "Tell them to watch the feeds," she said finally. All of them. As the siege entered its third day, patterns began to emerge that even the coalition's rigid military structure couldn't ignore. Human resistance cells that had spent weeks harrying coalition forces began appearing openly, not to attack but to coordinate humanitarian efforts. Hidden weapon caches were revealed and then dismantled, their components repurposed for construction rather than destruction. But most significantly, humans began telling their stories. It started with the old woman who had first emerged from the city. She sat with a group of young coalition soldiers, their weapons forgotten as she spoke of surviving Earth's last great war, of losing her entire family to humanity's violence, and of spending decades working to ensure such horror never happened again. "We have been the monsters in our own stories too many times," she said, her weathered hands folded in her lap. "When the stars gave us a chance to choose who we would be to the universe, we decided to try being something better." The stories spread like wildfire. Former soldiers spoke of the wars they had fought and the peace they had struggled to build. Parents shared their hopes for their children to grow up in a universe where different species could meet without violence. Children, with the fearless honesty of youth, asked coalition soldiers why they had come to hurt people who just wanted to be friends. Each story was a small thing, a single voice in the darkness. But together, they became a chorus that reached across space to the 12 worlds, carrying a simple message: "We are here, we are human, and we choose to be more than what you expected." Mira had stopped counting individual acts and started tracking something larger. Response rates to her feed were exponential, but more interesting were the sources. Military personnel from across the coalition fleet were accessing her data. sharing it, adding their own observations. The quiet girl's count was becoming the invasion's unofficial record. She pulled up comparative data from previous coalition invasions. The patterns were stark. Every other conquered world had followed the same trajectory. Initial resistance, mounting casualties, eventual surrender or annihilation. The kill counts had been the scorecards of civilization's worth. But Earth had broken the pattern, not through superior firepower or clever tactics, but by refusing to accept the coalition's fundamental premise. They had rejected the idea that violence was the measure of a species' value. A private message appeared on her screen. Origin unknown. Keep counting. The universe is watching. General Takahashi received the report with grim satisfaction. The Sydney cell had successfully disabled a coalition patrol without firing a shot, by the simple expedient of surrounding them with a crowd of singing humans until the confused soldiers had agreed to stand down rather than fire on civilians. "It's working," Maria said, disbelief coloring her voice. "The coalition forces are paralyzed. They came prepared for war, and we're giving them humanity," Kaito finished, in all its messy, contradictory, beautiful complexity. "But for how long?" Maria asked. "What happens when they get over their shock? When orders come down to complete the mission regardless?" Kaito had been waiting for this question. "Then we find out if we've truly changed, or if we're still the violent species they expect us to be. Either way, we face it as ourselves, not as the monsters they painted us to be." On the fourth day of the siege, cracks began to show in the coalition's resolve, not in their military might, that remained overwhelming, but in their certainty. It started with a single Drex warrior named Koth. Standing guard at the southern perimeter, he had spent days watching humans move freely between the city and coalition lines. He had eaten their food, listened to their music, even attempted their strange game called soccer with laughing children who didn't seem to care that he had 4 legs and kept tripping over the ball. When the order came to tighten the perimeter, to begin the final phase of the siege, Koth did something unprecedented in Drex military history. He said no, not loudly, not defiantly. He simply set down his weapon and walked into the city, where he was welcomed with the same open arms that had greeted every visitor, enemy or friend. Within hours, others followed. Not many at first. Military discipline was strong across all coalition species, but enough to be noticed, enough to be reported, enough to spark furious debate in the command centers of the fleet. Valnara watched the defections with a mixture of rage and something she couldn't quite name. Fear? Uncertainty? Or perhaps envy for those who could simply walk away from everything they had been taught to believe? "Seal the perimeter," she ordered. "No one else leaves their post." But even as her orders were carried out, she knew it was too late. The damage wasn't to her military force. She still had more than enough firepower to level the city. The damage was to the very idea that had brought them here. Lieutenant Sorka found Mira at her station. Dark circles under the girl's eyes from days without sleep. The quiet analyst had become something of a legend among the fleet's human contingent, her unofficial count viewed as the real record of Earth's invasion. "You should rest," Sorka said gently. Mira shook her head. "Can't. Too much happening. Too much to document." She gestured at her screens, showing feed after feed of interactions between humans and coalition forces. "No one's ever done this before. No invaded world has ever refused to be enemies." "Why do you think Earth is different?" Sorka asked. Mira was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Because we've been the invaders too. We know what it's like to be the monsters in someone else's story. Maybe that's what it takes, being the villain enough times that you finally decide to try being something else." "The coalition won't accept this," Sorka warned. "They can't. Their entire structure depends on violence being the answer." Mira finished. "I know. But look," she pulled up a new data stream showing communication logs from across the 12 worlds. "They're watching. Not just the military, but civilians, teachers, artists, merchants, parents, and they're asking questions. The questions were indeed spreading. In the great forums of Zerion Prime, Irgathi merchants debated whether profit truly required conflict. On the crystal worlds of the Kailan, hive minds pondered the collective value of individual mercy. Even among the warrior Drex, voices began to ask if strength could be measured in something other than bodies broken. Valnara stood before the tactical display, her scales a dull gray of exhaustion. 6 days into the siege, and New Beijing still stood, not through military defiance, but through a resistance she had no training to counter. The kill count remained absurdly low. Earth, 211. Coalition, 187. Most deaths on both sides came from accidents, misunderstandings, or the actions of individuals who couldn't accept the strange peace that had descended. In any other invasion, such numbers would indicate total victory for the invaders. Here, they felt like defeat. "Commander," the communications officer interrupted her brooding. "Priority message from the 12 World Council. They're demanding immediate action. The chairman himself wants to know why a primitive world still stands after a week of siege." Valnara knew what they wanted. A massacre. A final assault that would paint the streets with blood and prove once and for all that the coalition way was right. It would be easy. A single order, and her forces could turn New Beijing into a charnel house that would satisfy the most bloodthirsty viewer. But as she opened her mouth to give that order, images flashed unbidden through her mind. The elderly human woman planting her white banner, children offering flowers to warriors, her own soldiers, sitting in circles with humans, sharing stories and food and something that might have been understanding. "Commander," the officer prompted, "your orders?" Valnara's scales shifted through a spectrum of colors as she wrestled with everything she had been taught, everything she believed, everything she was. "Tell the council," she said slowly, "that they should come to see for themselves. Tell them that Earth refuses to be conquered in any way that matters." The 7th day dawned clear and bright over New Beijing. The siege lines remained, but they had become something else, a meeting place rather than a battle line. Humans and coalition forces mingled freely, the weapons of war abandoned for the tools of peace. In the city center, a vast crowd had gathered, humans and aliens together, waiting for something, though no one seemed quite sure what. The official siege would end at noon, local time. What happened then was anyone's guess. Mira stood among them, her data pad clutched in tired hands. She had documented everything, created a record that no official history could erase. The other count had become something beyond numbers, a testament to what could happen when people chose compassion over conflict. General Takahashi was there too, standing with his staff in full view of coalition forces. No hiding now, no guerrilla tactics, just humans, facing whatever came next with open hearts and open hands. Valnara descended from the Arbiter in full military regalia, her honor guard forming around her. She had made her decision, though she knew it would likely end her career, possibly her life. The 12 World Council did not forgive failure, and by their standards, she had failed utterly. But as she looked at the gathered crowd, her soldiers standing peacefully among those they had come to conquer, she wondered if perhaps there were other standards by which to measure success. She approached the white banner the elderly woman had planted on the first day. It still stood, a little weathered but unbroken, like Earth itself. "I came here to conquer a violent world," Valnara announced, her voice carrying across the square through translators and amplifiers. "To add Earth's defeat to the Coalition's glory. To prove that our way, that might makes right, was the only truth that mattered." She paused, her 6 eyes scanning the crowd. "I have failed in that mission. Earth's kill count is a joke by our standards. Your resistance has been incomprehensible. You have given us no glory, no honor as we understand it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Valnara continued. But in that failure, I have seen something else, a different kind of strength, a different kind of victory. You have shown us that there are other ways to measure a civilization's worth. She reached for her command baton, the symbol of her authority, and the crowd tensed. But instead of issuing orders, she laid it at the foot of the white banner. I cannot conquer what refuses to be conquered, she said. I cannot defeat what refuses to fight. The siege of New Beijing is over. What happens next? That is for all of us to decide. The silence that followed seemed to stretch across space itself. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, came the sound of clapping. One person, then another, then hundreds, thousands, human and alien alike. Not celebration of victory or defeat, but recognition of something new being born. Something that had no name yet but would reshape the galaxy in ways no one could foresee. In the gambling halls of the 12 worlds, screens went dark. There was nothing left to bet on. No odds to calculate. The very foundation of their entertainment had been shaken. Earth had not won in any traditional sense, but neither had it lost. It had simply refused to play the game. Debates raged in the Coalition Council. Some demanded immediate retribution, a second invasion with clear orders to exterminate rather than conquer. Others, influenced by the countless hours of footage from Mira's feeds, argued for a complete reassessment of Coalition policy. We cannot simply ignore this, the chairman insisted, his ancient voice crackling with indignation. Earth has made a mockery of our entire system. Or perhaps, suggested the Kaelin representative, their collective voice harmonizing in thought. Earth has shown us that our system was already a mockery. We have measured worth in death for so long, we forgot to consider life. The arguments would continue for months, years even. But the seed had been planted across the 12 worlds. Citizens who had watched the siege of New Beijing began to question if humans could choose mercy over violence, if they could face annihilation with open hands instead of closed fists. What did that mean for the Coalition's future? On Earth, the work of rebuilding began immediately. Not just physical reconstruction, but something deeper. The networks that had saved lives during the invasion transformed into connections between human and Coalition peoples. Exchange programs were proposed, cultural festivals planned, the tools of war repurposed for peace. Mira Chen, no longer quiet, no longer overlooked, found herself at the center of it all. Her other count had become required reading in schools across the 12 worlds. She was invited to speak, to share, to help others understand what had happened in those 7 days that changed everything. You kept score when no one else was watching, a young Silthian student told her at one such gathering. You showed us what really mattered. I just counted what was already there, Mira replied. Humanity chose what to show. I just made sure someone was paying attention. General Takahashi retired shortly after the siege, his work complete. In his final speech, he reflected on humanity's long, bloody road to that moment. We have not become perfect, he said. We are still capable of violence, still struggling with our darker nature, but we have learned that we have a choice. When the universe came to test us, we chose to show our best rather than our worst. That choice, renewed daily, is what defines us now. Valnara remained on Earth, accepted a position as military liaison to the new collaborative government forming between Earth and progressive elements in the Coalition. It was not the career she had envisioned, but it was, perhaps, the one she was meant to have. You taught us something, she told Sorka one evening as they watched the sun set over New Beijing. The city showed scars from the siege, but also signs of new growth, buildings that incorporated Coalition architecture, markets where human and alien goods mingled freely. What's that? Sorka asked. That victory doesn't always look like domination. Sometimes it looks like understanding. Sometimes it looks like peace. Sorka smiled. It took us a long time to learn that lesson. Too long. But we're glad to share it. As years passed, the siege of New Beijing became legend, but not in the way the coalition had expected. Instead of a tale of conquest, it became a story of transformation. The moment when the galaxy's understanding of strength shifted from those who could take lives to those who could save them. The gambling halls found new purpose, broadcasting cultural exchanges and collaborative achievements. The kill count boards were retired, replaced by metrics of cooperation, innovation, and mutual aid. It wasn't a perfect system, no system ever was, but it was a beginning. And in a small office, in what had once been the Arbiter's Data Processing Center, now converted to a center for interspecies understanding, an older Mira Chen continued her work. No longer counting acts of mercy, those had become too numerous to track, but documenting the slow, steady progress of a galaxy learning to measure its worth in kindness rather than killing. On her desk, framed in simple wood, hung the question she had first written in those desperate days of the siege. In counting lives saved, what truly defines a civilization's strength? The answer, she had learned, was not in the counting itself, but in the choice to save lives in the first place. To see others, no matter how different, how alien, how seemingly hostile, as worthy of compassion, to choose again and again to be better than your worst moments. It was a lesson Earth had paid for in centuries of blood before finally understanding. Now, it was a gift freely given to any who would receive it. The quiet girl in the back had kept score when the universe was watching. And in doing so, she had helped change what game they were playing entirely. Outside her window, New Beijing thrived. Human and alien children playing together in parks. Former soldiers from both sides working to build something new. Artists collaborating on works that no single species could have imagined alone. It wasn't paradise. There were still conflicts, still misunderstandings, still those on all sides who yearned for the old ways. But there was also hope. Hope that the count that mattered most was not of the dead, but of the living. Not of enemies defeated, but of friends discovered. And in that hope, perhaps, lay the true strength of any civilization, the courage to face the unknown with open hands rather than closed fists, to see in the other not a threat to be eliminated but a possibility to be explored. The coalition had come to Earth expecting to find monsters. Instead, they found mirrors, reflections of what they had been, and visions of what they could become. The choice, as it always had been, was theirs to make. And in the end, when the final tallies were counted and the historians had their say, that choice, multiplied across billions of beings making it every day, would matter more than all the kill counts in the galaxy. For Earth had shown that there was another way to keep score, and the universe, at last, was learning how to count what truly mattered.